Well, hello, Viva Albertos. JP Hill here for another episode of the Viva Albertos podcast. And we are joined today with some of our writing team that were at the Q&A session from Blogger Day, which was in our world last Saturday at Busch Stadium. It's a great time every year. Recently, at least, the Cardinals have hosted a select group. Oh, by the way, I nearly cut my finger off, as you guys can see. This might be a good episode to listen and not watch, so you can't see the blood stains. But but yeah, every year they host the blogging and podcasting community, put us up in a suite and fill us full of hot dogs to try to butter us up so that we'll say better things about the Cardinals on our blogs and our podcasts. But John Mozeliak was kind enough to join us for a 45-minute conversation. And I didn't know this at the time. I didn't think about it. In retrospect, I guess I kind of knew, but Jeff Jones put out there that this was the first time that Mo has sat down with a group of, as he said, writers, podcasters, content creators, speakers, authors, open thread creators, whatever we happen to be on any given day. But first time he's done that since like spring training. And some of you will know probably that they didn't do an end of the year interview. They've really cut back on their media availability, and I think the beat writers are a little bit frustrated by that, which I can understand. So we are the fortunate ones that got to ask Mozeliak some questions. And as I said to Jeff, if I had known that they needed more access to Mo, I would have asked better questions myself instead of is a hot dog a sandwich? But that is what you asked for, VEB. That's what you want. And so that's the kind of content we will provide. So today we're going to go through Mozeliak's answers a little bit, and you can always listen to that. Another podcast episode has the whole interview up there, but we'll give Mo's reactions and our reactions to that and kind of our own opinions as we go through. Now, who do we have here with us today? We've got from bottom and around, Blake Newberry's with us, wearing his polo today because he's just off work. How's it going, Blake?
Good. Doing well.
Good. And Heather, who broke into her mother's house to be here with us. There's a whole story there.
It was a whole ordeal. Anyone that knows me even a little bit is not surprised by anything about that story.
Did you find any rats?
No. I got out of the basement before I had to face that reality.
Well, we're glad you made it. And last we've got Adam. How's it going, Adam?
I'm good, man. I actually got to catch another game with some friends. It was Paul Skeens' start, so got to see him shut down the Cardinals over 5 or 6 innings. So he was in St. Louis, so I had to catch that before they left. So
yeah,
decent time.
100%. Yeah. I thought about going up to the game today just for fun, but 2 or 3 trips in St. Louis in the span of 4 or 5 days was all I could do. So. Well, we're back here, and let's talk a little bit about Blogger Day. It was my second time. I know, Blake, it was your second time. Heather, how many have you been to?
I've only been to 2 also, I think. Okay. I think I've been invited to 3, but I couldn't make it to one of them. So yeah, I think I've only been to 2. I think that was only my second one.
Yeah, and then Adam, it was your first, if I remember right. Yeah.
So
general reaction, being there in the room, listening to Mo, seeing all those other people that create other content for the Cardinals. How was that for you? How was that experience for you? Anyone can start. Let's start with Adam. He was the first one, first time there. What did you think about it, man?
I think the biggest surprise for me was asking for the drink and not having to pay for it. It was all included. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I was shocked, but yeah, in general, I was kind of shocked at how open Mo was. I mean, obviously, he's kind of towards the tail end of his career here, and the consensus now amongst everybody that we talked about this with is that, he's tend to be more open. He's going to be more straight up about some of the answers that he's going to give. And in that, I know with the question that I asked, to a degree, there was sort of a right answer in terms of how to build that model with how to, build overall, how to extend players and what to look for. So kind of, pick his brain and see what he had to say and how the Cardinals do it was pretty interesting. And overall, just, you hear other executives speak and, sit down with them and pick their brains and you kind of compare it to what Mozeliak has to say. Different brains in your organization have different ideas, different methods, and different ways of systematically thinking. And it was interesting to see what the head honcho kind of has to say all about it. So,
yeah, we get asked that question a lot, it seems like. And I know the reporters do is, do you just get Mo speak whenever you go to these things? The answer is no. Well, actually, in some ways you do, but not in the way you think, because people have this idea that Mo talks around issues and talks around questions, and I've never really seen him do that. I've always seen him be very sort of direct and straightforward. He might not give you the answer that you want, but he is going to give you the answer that is actually true for the organization. And so if you look at it that way, he's pretty direct and pretty straightforward. Yeah, Adam mentioned his question. One of my questions was about payroll, and he kind of rabbit trailed a little bit on it. But before he did that, he answered it very directly. And that was the first time that I think, he's ever answered that question that directly. So brand new information that we got. But we'll talk about that. So Heather and Blake, you guys have done it before. I think Blake at least was braver this time. You asked 2 questions. So what was your return trip to Busch in the big suite and everything like that like?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of fun. It's always one of my favorite events of the year, and I really appreciate the fact that the Cardinals even do it, because like we're just a bunch of bloggers out here like writing about baseball in our free time, even our job. So to be able to like have the opportunity to actually go there and just have food and drink paid for, ticket paid for, and be able to just sit there like 10 feet from John Mozeliak is pretty cool.
Yeah. Heather?
Yeah, that's the same. I think it's a cool thing that they do. I don't know if it's a common thing among teams or not, but I do know that the Cardinals have like a lot of passionate fans and a lot of really strong, I think, blog community that writes about some pretty good stuff. And I feel like I see sometimes at least some work that we as a site have done, and it looks like it's being somewhat referenced in some things that they talk about during the games. I've definitely seen some things like that where I'm like, I wonder if that's based on what we wrote. So I think that's really cool. I also like getting to meet up with you guys. It makes me think we need to do some more, like, we used to do meetups and stuff for the site, and I'm thinking that might be something fun to do, go to a game. So that's actually my favorite part, is really seeing you guys.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we got our great picture. I'm sorry, Adam. I know that the picture that
Dude, that was so bad. I swear to God. I was like, how do I awkwardly fit in here with my drink in one hand and like I'm in the middle of the group? Yeah, the free drink, right?
You got to show up and drink. You did well.
Yeah, it was definitely starting to kick in towards the end, as you can tell, when I was trying to like, hey, like let's see how we can fit in, but
yeah.
We made it work.
It was still fun. I think our person, I came through as the awkward dad who's just sort of standing there, and Adam, you came off as being young. It was fun. So anyway, Gabe couldn't join us, I guess, today. He's busy doing Gabe things, I suppose. So,
yeah,
but he can weigh in on the site, and anyway, yeah, it was a lot of fun. One thing I will say too, it just because I know some people on the site are interested in this, but when I showed up there at I can't remember what time it started, like 1:30 or something like that. Walk in, Carson Shipley is one of the media relations guys for by the way, hi Carson, I know you're listening now. He was there and introduced myself, said hi, shook my hands. He knew who I was or whatever, and he basically quoted back my article from the previous day back to me. And so if you ever wonder whether the Cardinals folks read Viva El Birdos, they do. They read it. They follow it. They keep track of us. And they know us. I don't know if Mo has a burner account where he's in the comments, but he probably does. I would if I was the GM. It'd be fun. So anyway, they do pay attention, and so like you guys, I'm super thankful about the opportunity to be able to do there, and I know sometimes in the blogging and Twitter community, people can get really after the Cardinals, and even though I, at least, and I can't speak for you guys, but I know you guys too, always try to tell the truth the way that we see it. We do appreciate the Cardinals and the information that we have and the access that we have, and do try to represent the truth of what they're saying, what they're doing, and even though we're not reporters or journalists, we do try to do what we can to make sure we cover the team fairly. And I think that they show a little bit of appreciation for doing that. So. All right, so that was the event. Let's talk a little bit about the central part of it. John Mozeliak was sort of the core of it. We got our Q&A with him, 45 minutes. One of the things that he said right off the bat was that his time as the president of baseball operations is likely coming to an end. That wasn't breaking news. He sort of made that clear. But as you guys were interacting with him and we got to see him a little bit, my first question, or my first thought, sort of an overall thing from that event. Do you feel like that his impending retirement or transition is affecting the way that he operates, affecting the way he communicates to the media? Anything like that? Like, did you notice anything? Have you noticed a little bit different about Mo this year or the last, year and a half?
I think I've seen Gersh in like the dugout doing like pregame interviews and stuff before, and I don't think I recall seeing that in the past. And I wonder if Mo is maybe trying to let some of the other guys in the front office get some time in front of the camera since he knows he's stepping away.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I don't know if that's actually true or not. That's just is kind of I feel like I'd literally never seen Gersh do anything before, like last 26 weeks or so.
Yeah, I don't think I could pick him out of a lineup if I had to. Probably could, but I've heard him on a podcast or two. Like I think Derek Gould had him on a podcast last year, which by the way was an excellent listen. You could probably find that on the archives if you want to hear more about him. But yeah, I haven't seen that, but I haven't been watching a whole lot of pregame to be honest. So yeah. And anyone else about Mo? Yeah, a general takeaway from Mo's state of mind and where he is right now.
I don't think it's just generally been affecting, like the fact that he's going to be leaving pretty soon is affecting so much his operations, right? He's a professional and, they have a task to complete before the end of his tenure. But like we talked about earlier, he's definitely, at least in my opinion, it could also just be the fact that I'm paying him more attention now that, I've been a part of the community for about a year and a half now. That, I mean, he's been more open, more candid, and I feel like the narrative of Mo Speak doesn't ring as loudly as it once did, right? A lot of people would probably argue that, he's not giving as political answers as he once did. And, maybe there's still slightly not exactly what you want to hear, but like JP, you mentioned, it's probably what represents the organization's belief as a whole. So, I do appreciate that. And, he's not like David Sampson open, with his communication, but he's still, you can appreciate the information that he gives. And I wish more executives in all sports or more leaders in general were like that. So.
Heather, did you have any thoughts about Mo? His countenance in the room?
He does carry a presence, but it seems to have changed. He seems, I don't know how to phrase this, and it's even in the way, like he's got a beard and stuff now. It just seems like he's done. Not done as in like doesn't want to do it anymore, but just like I don't know. I'm picturing like a dad thinking back on his life and telling his children stories and stuff. That's what it kind of feels like. It's just like he needs a bourbon and a cigar and a smoking jacket, and he's just ready to chill.
The New Balance shoes, the high.
Yeah,
yes, the New Balance
the
shoes.
cargo shorts, New Balance shoes.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything. I do not have New Balance shoes, but I did. And I got rid of all my cargo shorts. So
they're coming back now.
Are
Now's
they
the
really?
time.
Of course they would. After I get
Cargo
rid of
pants,
yeah. I think one of the things that I was thinking about and wondering is that I know that if it was me, if I was in that situation, I would want to go out with sort of a bang. Like I would be pushing to try to win. I would be, if there were changes that need to be made in the organization, I would be making those changes pretty aggressively. And maybe we've seen some of those things this year. Maybe I think about, we can get to your question here in a minute about fastball usage and other things like that. Even bringing in the veteran starters and Carpenter and Crawford, some of that was a reaction to the year before, maybe an overreaction to 2023, but also maybe, them thinking, well, this is our best chance of catching lightning in a bottle, is not just going with young kids who could falter, but older guys who might be able to find an Albert Pujols like something in the tank one last time and push the team to the playoffs. So, we'll see how that goes. He's definitely not going all in. That's not debatable, but it'll be interesting to see how this sort of thing plays out over the next year or maybe two. I can't remember if he said now.
I think it's
he plans to stick
end
around.
of next year is his
Yeah,
last.
that hasn't changed, right? Still end of next year.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard.
It does have a one last job kind of vibe to it.
Yeah.
Now that you say it like that, it's like one last job, one last heist.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I'm coming back for one last heist.
One last
That's
heist.
what it feels like.
Yeah.
I think it's also fair to say that, I don't think it's so much haste more so than like, oh, he had a great run. And I also feel like he, it's almost like, he had success, that he won a championship. He's been one of the best executives in the sport, probably like amongst the best ever. We think about pound for pound and what the kind of success that he's had and what he's been able to accomplish over the course of 20 years. I almost feel just like, he's not phoning it in, but he's kind of like basking in some success that he's had in the past. And it's not so much, I feel like, where he's like, oh, like forcing to win, and like probably would be making other moves, but so much where like he still feels like, hey, we accomplished something, and he's not going into it so much like, oh, like I need to do something or I'm hasty about it.
Do
Yeah,
you
I
think
think
that his getting the criticism that he gets and the boos from the fans, do you think that then in one sense he's not necessarily trying to preserve a legacy, but I think that he feels like he has a legacy and they have a story and they've had a measure of success. Do you think that those boos and those negative criticisms that he's getting the last year or two are affecting him and changing his outlook a little bit?
I don't think so, because I think if they were, he would have stayed away from Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson and shot higher. I think that he made and that's nothing against like the decisions that he made, but I think he made very much the John Mozeliak Cardinals decisions in the offseason,
Yeah.
and they were not the most popular signings in the world even when they happened. So I think if he had been affected by fan sentiment, we would have maybe seen him go about things in a different way. And I think even when I hear Mo talk, it seems like he just generally doesn't care what people think of him from the outside. I think he understands. Like even when you hear him talk about people criticizing Ali Marmol, he's like, it's a tough job. You guys don't get it from the outside. That's fine, but whatever. Like it's pretty obvious to me that he just doesn't really care about that. And that honestly, if you're in that kind of a position, I feel like that's kind of how you have to approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely have to have thick skin. I think it's interesting though that he it's true that it doesn't seem like he cares, but then you know what? He like the first thing he did was talk about the criticism that he gets from the blogging community, you know. So he doesn't care and he comes off as not caring, but he sure brings it up a lot, you
It
know?
might just be a tongue-in-cheek little like jab at the community to get things started.
Yeah. 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 Well, that's probably good about Mo. One of the things that I wanted to do, because I mean, again, we're 4 or 5 days out now, and there you probably have had an opportunity to listen to. We've talked about it in the comments. There's been other podcasts about it out there that maybe you've listened to. So I wanted to kind of focus a little bit on, at least early on, the questions that we asked from our group, why we asked them, the purposes of those questions, and then maybe we can get on some of the other sort of comments and things out there from the rest of it. So, and I guess I didn't put this in any particular order. So I'll start with Blake's question. Blake, your first question I thought was an interesting one, and so why don't you just go ahead and tell us again the question that you asked? Maybe not the same wording, but
yeah,
what you asked, and then how Mozeliak responded and what you thought about that response.
Yeah, so I asked about fastball usage because I mean you guys know I wrote an article about that earlier in the season, where the Cardinals have really seen their fastball usage go from like top of the league pretty consistently to more towards the middle of the pack, and that's starting to catch up to the trend that we've seen across the league. So I wanted to know kind of was there a catalyst for that, whether it was like a change in thinking, which it clearly has been, but why that came about, and then who in particular, if there was somebody he wanted to point to maybe leading the charge. So I didn't know what to expect with the who part of it. And Mo kind of hit on it at the very end when he answered. He kind of started with, oh, it was a group effort, which is kind of what I expected. But what I was kind of curious about was, did Chaim Bloom have some kind of influence? Did a pitching coach change kind of spark things? And that's kind of what he touched on at the end was he's like, for a while, we've been an organization that values pitching to contact and getting quick outs. That shouldn't be surprising. And fastballs are pitches that do that. You throw them in the zone, they get hit, and then you let your defense make plays. Basically, he then went, well, the league is shifting towards valuing swing and miss more. That's something that we have wanted to start valuing more internally. So we started to switch to more like breaking stuff usage and less fastball usage. And then at the very end, he talked about how, they did things one way with Mike Maddox when Mike Maddox was the pitching coach. And now that they have Dusty Blake, they're doing things another way. And to me, kind of that's implying that Dusty Blake is really not necessarily, he might be driving the change, but at the very least, he's on board with the changes. And it's something that he wants to see. And I think that's interesting because we don't really hear Dusty Blake talk very often. And the job of like a pitching coach or a hitting coach, you don't really hear much about it at all. So I think getting that kind of insight from the top that Dusty Blake is actually somebody who is really active on that front is something that's encouraging to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other takeaways from that particular conversation from the rest of you? One of the things that I noticed about that conversation and others, talking about ROI. Did anyone else notice that Mozeliak talked about ROI like 10
a
times?
lot.
And I totally understand that he's an executive, and that's what executives are worried about is sort of the business analytics side of things. But one of the things in that particular context was about making sure that you were getting a proper return on the investment, and fastballs might simply be not more efficient in terms of like getting outs, but might be more efficient in terms of staying healthy. And there was a lot that he mentioned about that.
Yeah. That was really interesting because he talked about risk management a lot, I think, too, which kind of jives with the whole like Cardinals message of the last decade. But he's basically mentioned it sounds like internally in the front office they basically think that more sliders equals more injuries, or more breaking stuff and less fastballs equals more injuries, and that seems to be the lens that they're looking at, or at least higher injury risk, which you would generally see play out with more injuries happening. So I think it was interesting to see that could probably be part of why they've been so resistant to following the league. When it comes to this, but then it was cool to see him also talk about how it's like you want to go to a guy who's been in single A for 2 years, whose career is kind of stalling out, and tell him to do the exact same thing. He's not going to like that. He's going to want to try to switch things up to actually progress his career. And I think it's good to see that they're open to things like that, because there are a number of pitching prospects throughout the system who don't have good fastballs, who have been throwing their fastballs too much in the past. And it's good to see that the Cardinals see this like as a whole organizational wide thing where they can go to some of these pitching prospects and have them do different things so that they're actually playing to their strengths.
Yeah. If we had more time, I would have asked him about the balance between ROI and sort of risk assessment, because throwing more fastballs, maybe you have fewer injuries, but you're less effective overall as an organization. So, which do you value more? Not, having players available, or having players available but not as effective as they could be. And I don't know, you could have a long conversation about that with someone like Mo, I think.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been actually a really interesting question to hear him talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was Blake's first. I thought another interesting thing. Well, I felt like I got to give credit a little bit to, on the side. I think it was the Duke that was like, JP, you need to ask a payroll question. I'm like, yeah, you know what I do. Should ask. Even though I get really tired of payroll once it gets into the season, I do invest a lot into that, and that's kind of what I've for some reason made what I do is payroll conversation. So, what I ended up asking him essentially was, again, I thought it was a question that we really haven't had an answer to. I think that there was some assumption, but I don't think I've ever seen where he has come out and specifically said the answer to this question. So in a year like now, where you've got an international draft, you've got amateur draft, and a high draft pick too that you're going to have to pay for, they added coaches, and I think it was either Mozeliak or Bill DeWitt at one point talked about payroll and mentioned coaches. They'd spent more on their coaches this year and bring in new coaches and things like that. And so what I asked Mo essentially was that when you're talking about payroll and payroll projections from like our side of things, is there one bucket that everything comes from, or does the draft have a line and amateur over here so that payroll can stay whatever, or do they all sort of have to float up and down and balance because you only really have one bucket? So he answered that extremely definitively. He said, yes, the way that we operate is with one bucket. So now from there, he went on about TV and about payroll stability and about things like that. And we could talk about that. That really didn't interest me. But what I thought was interesting about that is if you look at payroll this season, it is essentially static, maybe a little bit low. And that makes a little bit of sense considering that revenue we know is lower than they expected last year. But they also have a high draft pick that they've got to pay for. We know that they added coaches. So it really doesn't surprise me that their payroll was a little bit lower this season than maybe we anticipated, because they all throw that into one bucket. Now, my question for you is not so much about the one bucket question. You're not accountants. I don't think you really care about that. But one of the things that he mentioned in that conversation was this new breed of ownership that is coming into the game and are spending differently and operating differently than Mozeliak. And so here you have him essentially saying that we have a conservative way of operating, that we have one payroll line or one line that we can do, and we have to divvy it up between draft and between technology and scouting and coaching and all those things. We can't just pour money into all of that stuff and pay for what we need. So let me ask you guys this. What does he mean, first of all, when he's talking about a new breed of ownership coming in? And then also, how are the Cardinals behind, and or are they behind? And so yeah, I'll throw it out to any one of you that want to answer that.
So I remember like that line pretty vividly, and I took it with kind of a grain of salt because I mean, first of all, he's talking and addressing the Steve Cohens of the world, the Oppenheimers, or the Guggenheims of the world that are literal like hedge funds and investment banks that own the Dodgers and have endless amounts of money to spend, and Steve Cohen, who is worth like what 13-14 billion dollars. So you compare that to other owners, it like dwarfs like what other owners can eventually spend on their teams. And a luxury tax for Steve Cohen, that bill might not be as much to foot, personally versus a DeWitt family or a smaller, more locally owned team. So, but even then, that was just, I think that's more of an excuse more than anything. It's like there's ways to win without having. And you saw the Mets, they threw $300-400 million at their team last year and they didn't make the playoffs, right? So it has absolutely nothing to do with how much you spend. And I was talking about this, I think, with either Blake or Kareem, that you can be like when the DeWitts go and threaten that, hey, we need $500 million to build XYZ for the stadium, or we're gonna have to cut payroll. Go ahead and strong arm us. Like, I don't care, right? There are ways to win, and if you need to cut payroll down to about 140 million, there are prudent ways to go about it, which is why I asked my question about pre-arbitration deals, because maximizing surplus value, being able to recycle players years 3, 4, and 5 is extremely important when you don't want to spend money, but in conjunction with positive player development, you can still field a winning team. So hearing him say that, I don't really feel like it's very fair to especially teams like Tampa Bay or Seattle that consistently run smaller payrolls, but they still have a lot of success with their player development, and maybe not so much at the major league level yet with Seattle, but what we saw with Tampa Bay, consistently making the playoffs, making a couple of World Series. And I think in general, hearing him say that, I felt like it was a little unfair, but it does help to have extra cash. But the reason why they're not having success, or why they're not really having the success with the budget right now, is because of lack of prior planning, not so much of, Steve Cohen is out in the game now spending $400 million and it's not fair. Or the Dodgers are signing Shohei Ohtani to deferred money, like $700 million, and they're like cheating. They're not really cheating. And Glass now and Yamamoto, that's not the problem, right? No. Other teams are winning, they're having success, and they're not doing the same thing. So there's 1,000,001 ways to win, and the Cardinals are not doing any of those ways.
Yeah,
but they haven't been recently.
I think that's interesting because I think it ties to a question. I think it was Kyle who asked about Chaim Bloom. And one of the things Mo said when talking about Chaim Bloom was he was interested in bringing him in, one, just because he respects him and all of that, but specifically to learn more about how he did things in Tampa Bay, which is a team that won a lot of games without spending a lot of money. So I think he kind of understands that with owners coming in and spending a lot of money, you kind of have to maximize your resources that you're using. And that regardless of how much money you're spending, whether you're a big market, small market team, whatever it is. And I think he understands that they've maybe fallen behind in that area a little bit, and trying to bring in a guy like Chaim Bloom was maybe part of an effort to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
100%.
That's kind of what I was wondering too, from your perspective, and any of you can answer this, is that if there is one bucket, would you divide the bucket up differently than how they're doing it now? And think about the draft, think about international draft signings, think about their coaching staff, things like that. Like, would you shift that? Would you be acceptable to have a lower payroll, but they're pouring money into the draft or pouring money into scouting, So I'll throw it out to you guys. Yeah, what do you guys think? Would you rather the bucket be divided up in different ways?
So, unless somebody else has something to say, but at the end of the day, a majority of the bucket, you're right. Like, it's every team usually goes entire bucket. And then, for example, DeWitt will tell Mozeliak, here's X amount of money, go ahead and spend it however you please, just go out and win, right? And if you don't, you're fired. So that's, and to see how, in general with our budget or with the Cardinals, I feel like most of the money goes to payroll, and we see player development and coaches, those guys don't get paid a ton. but like that's just like the thing. And like, we were talking about this too, where you see a lot of analysts and, the guys will come in, like the data scientists will be paid, very few, like very little compared to what they could be making at a different company, right? But they get that because people want to come work for a sports team. So a lot of teams could be reaping that benefit and signing really quality, analyst and player development and scouting personnel, who are just being paid $80,000-$90,000 a year because they're coaches and they're not players, right? Or managers. And that could really boost your return on investment and boost a lot of surplus value you have when your just players start progressing naturally because they end up being really good prospects or really good young talent. And like, at that point, you can extend them and even boost their value even more because now they're having basically team control years through year 10 instead of year 6. So, or whatever the case may be. So to see them kind of avoid that and overall just kind of that's how the budget really works. But to see them kind of, if they were to cut down on payroll, that would maybe help. But I feel like the answer would be just to throw a little bit more money into the guys that you're hiring from within and invest in that, infrastructure a lot more and see where that goes you.
So Blake, with draft slotting and draft pools, I guess they really couldn't throw a whole bunch of extra money into the draft, could they?
They couldn't do it in the draft or the international signing market. They basically that amount of money that they can spend. And the card, like every team pretty much just spends that amount of money, except in the international market where I think if you have extra money, you can trade it, or maybe they did away with that. But like you'll sometimes see people trading like $250,000 of international money for like a player to be named later. But for the most part, like teams just get a set amount of money, and it's usually not that much in terms of like an MLB team. Like it's not more than like $10 million, or in the draft it might be more for like teams picking at the top, but they'll just use the entire budget, and that's that.
Yeah. So really, because in thinking this through, and it's the first time we've really talked about this conversation in this way. I think I agree with you about. I think there's hidden payroll expenses and hidden expenses when you talk about bringing in coaches or statisticians and things like that. Yeah, someone might only be making $100,000, but their total outlay from the organization might be 2 or 3 times that. But still, you're not talking about the difference between Lance Lynn and Tyler Glasnow. By bringing in a couple extra analysts. That's not the thing that we're talking about. But if it is one bucket, I do wonder about some of the expenses as far as like stadium and some of the work they're wanting to do and maybe put aside to build buildings down in Jupiter. And we'll get to that a little bit because that's the kind of thing that could cut into it. And yeah, interesting to know that the one bucket's going to get divided up however they want to. And I will bring that up in payroll because I think that has serious implications on the way that the teams across the league are handling other CBT or luxury tax expenses with some of the outlays that they have to put out there, and also player benefits and things really is cutting into their budget as well. And if there's only one bucket, there's only one bucket. So, Heather, we haven't gone to you for a while. You didn't ask a question this year, and so I'm just sort of wanting to know from you, if you were going to ask Mo a question, what would you have asked him?
I have one prepared that one day I will ask him, but I just never get the nerve to do it. But I always want to ask him if he could pick out his own walk-up song, what would he pick? I know mine. It would be Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix.
So you would do that. Okay, I gotta ask here. You would do the Hendrix version and not the Stevie Ray Vaughan version.
Not Stevie Ray Vaughan. I would do the opening riff from the Hendrix version.
Yeah. Well, in my personal opinion, I'm probably gonna get shredded here online. But I love the Hendrix version, and it is the classic original. Stevie Ray's version is just a little bit tighter from a guitar perspective.
I don't know how shredded you could get for that opinion. It's like 2 of the greatest guitar players of all time.
Yeah.
I think either one, if I could only get the Stevie Ray Vaughan one, I would be happy with that also.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone noticed, you can see my amp back here in the corner. Anyone see my amp back there in the corner? You can ask me in the comments what it is. I will tell you all about it. Maybe I should write an article sometime about my guitars and my amps. So, all right, Blake, you asked the second question about. Well, just go ahead and tell us what it was and the answer you got for it.
Yeah, this one was really good.
This is one I didn't get exactly the answer I wanted, and then maybe could have asked. But I was asking Mo, like, because they went out and signed guys like Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson to 1 year deals with option years for next year. That obviously gives them a lot of flexibility and a lot of options going into the offseason of bringing those guys back and just kind of running it back with the same team, or maybe clearing out some of that payroll and letting like prospects come up. So I asked him basically, how does he view kind of the trying to balance giving prospects some runway to actually like make it in the bigs and earn their rotation spot versus, risking not having enough good starting arms if they're not actually performing as prospects. And what I wanted to do in that question was maybe stress the freeing up the money of not bringing back Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn and putting that towards other things. If you think a guy like Tink Hence can be in the fifth spot in the rotation, and that's not something Mo hit on as much as I wanted him to, but he seems very. I left his answer thinking that it was not going to be any prospects in the rotation, at least in opening day next year. And the way he answered it made it seem very much like you can never have too much pitching, and we're going to bring in arms, whether it's Lynn and Gibson or whether it's other people. It felt like to me it was going to be not like Tink Hence and Sam Robersa, for instance, fill in those spots. It's going to be them bringing in guys that are a little more experienced.
Yeah, and I think he said either in answer to that question or earlier to another one about how they really need this AAA rotation to step up.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of goes without saying that the lack of progress made by the AAA rotation is hurting them this year, and sounds like it's going to drift into next year.
Yeah, and one of the things that was interesting too, because he talked about the AAA rotation a lot, was he
Yeah.
said when you squint, you see a lot of relievers in that rotation group. So, and he even mentioned Gordon Graceffo by name later as somebody who could come up as a relief option out of the Cardinals bullpen later this year.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if that means Graceffo is going to be a long-term bullpen guy. I think I wouldn't necessarily be upset by that unless he gets back to kind of the stuff that he showed 2 years ago. But it is interesting that he's kind of soured a little bit on the long-term potential of some of the AAA guys, at least fill in back-end rotation spots.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Graceffo is the kind of guy that could have some success in the rotation and maybe refine a few things and then in the bullpen and then work his way into the rotation, kind of like a Lance Lynn a little bit did, but maybe not quite so direct a path as Lynn. But once you get in that bullpen, it's really hard to get out, though. I will say that. So, Adam and Heather, I'll ask you guys this: do you guys see any chance that one of the young starters right now seizes a spot for the rest of the season and takes a spot in the rotation next year, or are we looking at all either return guys or free agents in the rotation 2025?
I would honestly, with the way this team is going, they're teetering towards 500, and it really depends on where they're at towards the deadline and what they want to do with Gibson and Lynn. If they're not competing, it behooves them to try to move them and see what they can get. There will be some value with them, considering any team that acquires him theoretically has another year of team control with them. So if they're not contending, I would like to see them trade them away and put in just schmucks in the rotation. It really wouldn't matter because at that point you're just waiting for development for guys like Tinkens and hopefully Takeo Roby and other guys like Quinn Matthews down the road to just fill in that spot once that leaf turns over. But I wouldn't rush any player development, especially with a guy like Tinkens who is shown to be, I don't want to say fragile, but you need to be careful with his development with how his size and his frame. And considering how hard he throws right at that wide reframe. So just seeing like I wouldn't rush anything with any of these young guys, especially with these pitching prospects. Take it as long time as you need, and you're gonna bear a lot of fruit in a couple of years once all these guys have turned over from single A and high A and they bleed over into the high minors and eventually in the major leagues. I wouldn't rush anything.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. As it stands now, with how the team is playing now, there's no need to rush anyone. And there hasn't really been anyone on the major league roster or in AAA that's kind of stood out to me where we need to see that person in the rotation, right now they've kind of been surviving with the bullpen. So I don't know. I can't see it unless, and I don't know. I could see like a rotating sort of thing, kind of what they're almost doing with Liberatore and Palante and or maybe it's just those two. But they kind of seem to be rotating that last spot amongst like youngsters. So maybe something like that, but not like anyone with a full-time spot.
Yeah, I think that's always the consideration is that we always talk about 5 starters, but really you might as well talk about 6 or 7 or 10, by the end of the season. And that basically whoever you have penciled in as your 6 starter, you're going to need them for probably 20 to 25 starts or someone else. And I think we're seeing that exactly right now with Zach Thompson. If Thompson had been effective, he would have 10 starts on the season probably already, and considering Matt's, his injury, Thompson would have stepped right in, and by the end of the season, Thompson might have as many starts or more as Matt's. And so now, with Thompson not being able to lock down that spot, they're spreading it around 3 or 4 guys, and no one that's shown that they're capable of really holding that down. Do we think Palante has a chance to do that?
I always think Palante has a chance to do that, but I'm the resident Palante apologist. So we'll see. He made some encouraging tweaks in his last outing, and if he can actually show consistency, then maybe. But showing consistency for Palante has been the hard part for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just looking at his numbers, writing a preview and for the upcoming Cubs series. And I was like, oh, I mean, I don't know. He hasn't been giving up a lot of homers, and that's been the thing that's saving him. But everything else looks really scary. High, very low strikeouts, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, very low.
That story, I think it might have been in the Post Dispatch, who was talking about when Palante was throwing the bullpen, he was just like throwing his pitches, and I think it was Kyle Gibson who came over and was like, "You actually should be working on something when you're doing this."
Yeah.
And it tied back to Palante not really having great feel for his curveball, and then Gibson told him to work on the curveball more and like actually just spend an entire bullpen just focusing on that. And then he came out in his next outing and threw his curveball a bunch and missed a ton of bats with it. And I think it's easy to kind of build that narrative and see where that's going. So that doesn't necessarily mean his curveball is all of a sudden going to be a pitch that he just controls really well, because it's probably not. But if it's something he's willing to throw a lot, that is a pitch that can actually do a lot of damage for him.
Yeah. Sorry,
I like that story a lot.
I'm getting lost on Fangraphs. Fangraphs changed their page and their dashboard.
I noticed that.
So here I am. I'm like when I look up, I'm looking at Fangraphs, and I was trying to pull up his game logs because I wanted to see what his walk rate has been as a starter. I don't think it's been particularly good. But I kind of wanted to look at that. And I can't find.
I think it's on the left side. Like, you have to scroll down on the left side.
Oh, I see it now. Okay, well,
yeah.
I'm definitely going to take the time to do that now that we've already wasted a couple minutes talking about.
Click on menu as well.
We're nerds, but we're not big enough nerds to spend 20 minutes on Fangraphs. So sorry, Dan. Sorry, Jay. But yes, we do love it. But I did not know where the game logs are, and I found them. So I'll post an article about that. So yeah, all I know about Palante, all I care about is that if he just stopped walking guys, he would be a lot better. That's all. That's it. That's all I got. That's analysis for me today. So okay, let's jump to the trade deadline then. Mo had a couple questions about the trade deadline, and I think he kind of gave the obvious answers, and we can cover those. But what I want to know is what you guys are thinking based on where the team is right now, and what Mo said at the Q&A. Deadline's coming up in 2 or 3 weeks, plus then a month at the end of July. So now it's time to start thinking about it. Based on where this team is right now, what would you do? What would you fix? What would you not do? Yeah. Feel free to jump in there. I'm not going to ask anyone to go. You can just go.
Man, give me Harrison Bader back. Give me a right-handed hitting center fielder who can play defense and hit lefties.
It's really gaining some momentum on the side. Like, that's been talked about a couple times, and like I can see it. Like, it makes a total sense.
It would fit with what the Cardinals have done. I mean, you bring back Pujols, you bring back Wainwright an extra year, you bring back Matt Carpenter, you bring back Lance Lynn. Like, why stop there? Let's just keep going.
Yeah.
I like it.
So here, I'll explain what I like about that is that I know that Edman is going to be coming back. Mo said that Edman they're planning on him being back by the end of the month. But here's the deal, right? I keep seeing this. It drives me crazy, absolutely crazy, that they keep saying Cardinals center fielder Tommy Edman. Tommy Edman's never been like the full-time Cardinals center fielder. All he's ever been in his career is is, the shortstop, the second baseman. He came into this season with the idea that he would be their full-time center fielder, the expectation that he would, but he's never actually filled that role. Which all I mean to say with that is that he doesn't have to fill it now. Like the fact that he comes back, it's not Paul Goldschmidt coming back and you got to drop him at first base, or Nolan Arenado coming back and you're like, well, he's got to play third. Tommy Edman coming back does not have to be your starting center fielder, which means you could go out and get a better defender, probably still a better defender, with Harrison Baylor. His stats look pretty good. We still don't really know how good of a defender Tommy Edman is. And a guy that is, you can disagree with me here, but would you not say that Harrison Bader is at worst as good a hitter as Tommy Edman is normally? Like a 90 to 95 WRC plus hitter from Harrison Bader seems about right. So if you have the opportunity to get a better defender and a guy who's going to hit about the same, and then you gain a super utility guy, Tommy Edman, who just came off of wrist surgery, and nothing saps power and hitting ability more than a wrist injury, right? If you have the ability to change all that, then you gain an asset without just shifting liabilities, so to speak. Because honestly, as much as I love Tommy Edman, with the wrist injury that he's had, he might not be that much of a better hitter, at least initially, than Michael Ciani or Dylan Carlson. So react to what I said. Off you go.
I would say no in terms of Harrison Bader, trying to the whole narrative around him. And basically we just mentioned because of Tommy Edman. I mean, if you want a 1-WAR, 2-WAR center fielder who's going to put up, like you mentioned, a league average slash line and really, really good defense, just put Tommy Edman in center field, because you're already paying him whatever money you are, the $10 million over the course of 2 years. And he's there. And whenever he's healthy, you might as well plug him in center field, because I don't know about you guys, I don't want to see Michael Ciani playing in center field anymore. He's a great defender, but he's like a 50, 60, 70 WRC plus. Like he's not, like we knew he's a fourth outfielder and he's only there because Tommy Edman is injured. So to me, like you just plug, I don't have an issue with, the tag of calling him a center fielder, because to me, the minute he comes back, it's putting Ciani on the bench and plugging him in center field. And in regards to talking about like Harrison Bader back, I guess talking about him, Harrison Bader is one of the best center fielders in baseball. We know that, but Tommy Edman is just up there as well. I think he was 96 and
you're talking Tommy, about like 300 innings,
Yeah, we do.
That's a stretch to say compared to Harrison, who's had like 7 years, worth of actual production. I don't feel comfortable saying that Tommy Edman is definitely a high quality elite center fielder. I don't feel comfortable with that. And part of the reason why, just to make this all about me, is that I said that about Tommy Edman as a shortstop after a small sample size where he produced a really high quality OAA at shortstop and then never replicated it. So anyway, that's part of my bias here.
So, he still put up, I think overall, he's 96th percentile in over in OAA, just in general. And he's still a really positive center fielder. He's one of the best you have on the team. And regardless of what value you're going to pay for Harrison Bader, how much better is his defense going to be than what you're putting on top of him? It might be marginally better, like maybe a few runs over the course of a season, but is that worth the extra $5 million you're going to shell out to him? I really don't think so. I'd rather spend that money on the rotation or anywhere else. So, sure, he's probably a better defender, but not by much. I think he was only played 1 year in center field, but Tommy Edman was still really good out there last year. And to pay the extra money you're going to give to Bader, I'd rather just throw in the rotation or somewhere else. I don't think it's worth spending the money. If you want a league average center fielder hitting wise with above average defense or really good defense, just play Tommy Edman.
Blake, do you think that Tommy Edman can hit with power this year?
So Tommy
Edman can hit, period.
So that's the thing is I'm not held up on Harrison Bader, but I think the outfield itself just needs some sort of production in the current state that it's in. I think Tommy Edman coming back has the potential to help it a lot, but it also has the potential to not help it very much because he's been injured for a little while now, and it's a wrist injury, which I'm always just a little nervous about. Players coming back from wrist injuries and a guy who already doesn't hit for a lot of power, then trying to hit through any kind of lingering effects of like an off-season wrist surgery. It just has me a little nervous. So I think if you're trading for an outfielder, a center fielder like a Harrison Bader type, you're really buying the security that you're going to have production to that position going forward. Yeah. And I'm not necessarily sure that's something the Cardinals love doing, is buying security when they have other options. So I don't think it's necessarily the most Cardinals-y option on the board. but I think it would be something that's potentially interesting depending on where Tommy Edman is at with his recovery. And they obviously know that and we don't.
Yeah.
And even though they know that, they also like knew that with Dylan Carlson, and then he came back and has not been great. So I have hesitations about Tommy Edman simply because of the injury itself.
I will say that
See, I
Mo
remember
didn't
the Peter
seem
Borges.
super optimistic about Edmund hitting. I mean, he basically said, and I understand what he probably meant, but he also said it. He's like, we don't know how he's going to hit, and that wasn't the best vote of vote of confidence, right? He knows about risk just probably more than we do. So, anyway, Heather, what were you saying?
Oh, I remember the Peter Borges days. Great defensive center fielder. Had that wrist injury, and they were hoping that wouldn't be a problem, but it seems like that really had an impact on his hitting. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I really wanted that to work out too. I did like Peter Borges.
Yeah. So, Adam, you mentioned in the rotation, Mats is probably going to be back soon. Fifth spot in the rotation has been a problem. I think those are the two spots that we look at, and then bullpen is another possibility as well. With Mats coming back, with Palante around, what would you do in the rotation? Like, what would your approach be if you wanted to upgrade somewhere? How would you do it?
In terms of the trade deadline or with the players they
Yeah,
already
trade
have?
deadline. Yeah, trade deadline. Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if I would want to go about trying to upgrade the rotation at all. I mean, I would just kind of cut your luck. Because I mean, upgrading the rotation would mean you have to trade some of your prospects away, right? And I mean, do we really want to try to give away, you know, I mean, even then, the best pitching prospects on the team are probably some of the best prospects on the team are some of the younger pitchers or guys who you hope will fill in the rotation at some point and take the spots for the guys who are struggling. So it almost like I would almost kind of like disagree with the premise of it just simply because I don't want to see them trade away prospects in order to get a guy who they think will probably stopgap for that year or be, unless they're like something like changes and they're contending, right? But even then, I really don't hope they trade away some of their best, prospects like a Thomas at JC or someone like that for a quick rental.
So your stance would be based on their record and their actual ability. I think all of us probably basically predicted them as a fringe playoff team before some of these injuries. You would be on the line of stand pat or sell. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm not of the opinion that if they're teetering around 500 to try to make a quick move to try to get in and just deplete the farm system even more than they already have, but because it's not super strong as it is now. So take time to build that up. You know, if it means taking a year or two off, like they didn't succeed last year, if it means this year not playing super well, it's okay. Just take this off, take a year, shake it off, and see what they can do going forward and with better player development. And it seems like they've got that plan in place.
Heather, are you a stand pat or are you a go for it person right now, today?
Right now, it doesn't seem like it would be a good idea to go for it, just because it's tough because we still have Tommy Edman, who should be coming back at some point, and then Wilson. Do you pronounce his last name Contreras or Contreras? I know it sounds almost the same, but I want to say it right, and I can't hear the difference when other people say it. But Wilson
Contreras,
Contreras,
right? I don't.
that's right,
I've been the
right?
one that's butchered names the most, so I'm hesitant to say, but I've always
I
said
know. When I say it out loud, I'm like, they both sound good. I don't know. I'll say Contreras. With him, so he's been cleared for baseball activities. Um, is that looking imminent, him returning?
I think he said like before July is when he was planning on
Yeah, I
returning.
think his timetable is kind of similar to Edmonds. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
before July, sometime in June, which is, I mean, that's 2 weeks away here. So
I'm a little concerned. I don't know if you can still hear me. My headphones died. But
yeah, gotcha.
okay, cool. I'm a little bit concerned because the forearm injury, like anything with arms, wrists for hitters is a little scary. So I'm a little bit concerned about him coming back from that. But that would be he was the best hitter on the team by far, by far. And so that would be a nice shot in the arm, so to speak. So I don't know if they can make any run for the division or anything. And if they could, I don't know exactly what they should do. because the pitching hasn't really been, it's not been great, but they've been able to work around it with the bullpen, I think. What's really hard to watch is the middle of the order be so cold.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know what to do about that because you are kind of, you're pot committed as you in a way with Goldschmidt and Arenado, and it's like they just, what they really need to do is just start hitting better, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, I think that really is what it boils down to. It's a good thing the trade deadline's not right now. They've got
Mhm.
Goldie's been hitting better. He does have a tendency to get better as sort of the year goes on.
Yeah.
Still not, MVP caliber Goldschmidt or even like, 2019 caliber Goldschmidt with the Cardinals, but he's inching up there a little bit. And yeah, they really need them to be, they don't have to be MVP candidates again, but they need to be productive players. And
Mhm.
neither of them have really been able to put together long, sustained, runs of quality production. And frankly, that's really hurt the team. It just has.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at the Cardinals position players because there's really not an area where it makes a lot of sense to upgrade it.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
or to pay what it would take to actually provide the upgrade because you look at it, they're pretty set everywhere when healthy. If they think Tommy Edmonds is going to be fine in center field, they're pretty much set in the outfield with Newbar, Edmund, and Burleson. With Contreras coming back, that's pretty much set in the infield. I mean, you're not going to go trade for a first baseman and bench Goldschmidt. You're not going to go like bench Arenado and win in Gorman or win in Gorman. So like I don't really
Yeah.
think we're gonna see them make a move on the position player front, probably. And it sounds like they're not gonna go get or based on past history of the Cardinals, I don't expect them to trade a bunch of prospects to go get a starting pitcher. So it really seems like if they're gonna make a move, they're either gonna stand pat or they're gonna add like one bullpen piece.
Yeah.
It sounds like that's something Mo is open to because he talked about having like Kittredge, Romero, and Helsley throwing 7, 8, 9 every time the Cardinals are winning isn't necessarily a great formula to last an entire season. So it sounds like he's open to trying to bring in another guy who could potentially be like a seventh to eighth inning guy. But I think that's really the only move that
Yeah.
would make sense for the Cardinals in terms of not giving up prospects while still trying to recruit the team.
Is Fernandez not that guy? I mean,
I think he could be.
you
I
know,
don't know why he doesn't really seem to get looks in those situations.
yeah.
And I would actually be curious to see how he does in those higher leverage spots because I would throw him out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm kind of going back to an earlier part of this conversation is that I think I'll probably write about this next week in a bigger article, but I would really like to see them just go ahead and be aggressive with the AAA starters. And I realize that they're not putting everything together, but I would love to see them just sort of throw Gordon Graceffo in the major league bullpen now or soon, just to see what he can do, just to see if he can get a little velocity back and maybe generate some more Ks and not be not be an elite bullpen arm. I don't expect that, but if he could show that he's someone that could hold down a slot until like I can't remember who's out for long term and who's coming back. Middleton's out for long term. I
Riley O'Brien's coming back. Steven Matz
O'Brien's coming back, and there's someone else I'm missing. Who am I missing? That's coming back.
in the bullpen.
Yeah.
Jerome, maybe.
I think it's just O'Brien is the only one with the major league experience this year.
Okay. Yeah. It seemed like there was another guy that was hurt. Maybe I'm probably getting them all mixed up, but anyway, yeah. So if O'Brien can also come back and work his way in, there's another possibility. But I would like to see what someone like Graceffo could do out of the bullpen, personally, just to see. So, all right. Well, we got time for one more topic, and I'll kind of throw this out to you guys. If there's anything else from the Q&A that stood out to you or anything else that you wanted to cover, then speak up here. Otherwise, I'm just going to ask about Jordan Walker because Mo talked about that a little bit. So anyone got one more question or topic that you really, really, really wanted to talk about? I sold you on the Jordan Walker thing, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about Walker. Mo, he was asked about Jordan Walker, and basically what he said essentially is that hitters hit, and that they need. It's not necessarily that Walker is working on things down in AAA, although there's always things to work on. There's not a specific sort of measurable that they're looking for, even though there's been some narrative about his ability to hit the ball in the air. But what he's looking for at this point from Walker is production. He wants to see production. First of all, is that a fair assessment of what Mozeliak said? And Blake, you can answer this one. And what are we seeing from Walker right now that is not leading us towards production?
I think that's a fair analysis of what Mo said, and it's weird with Jordan Walker, honestly. Like one of his big issues, and we've seen it at the majors and the minors, is it's either pitch selection or it's not being able to handle the low pitch. He either needs to lay off of the low pitch entirely because he just beats it into the ground and makes outs, or he needs to learn how to actually do something with it. And I think that's something he's really struggled with. And we've still seen him struggle with it in the minor. So hopefully that's something improves. I know that he had a couple hits, I think yesterday or 2 nights ago in the minor of the game where he was actually hitting the ball hard, like 105 plus mile per hour exit velocities. And that's the kind of thing you want to see him do. And it's like, I just want to see him hit the ball in the air hard. It doesn't have to be like these towering, like 450-foot fly balls. Like you see a pitch that's at your knees, hit a line drive to like even to the opposite field. I don't care. Like I just want to see him do something where he's actually making that solid contact and doing things where he can drive the ball down the line or into gaps and actually have that extra base potential, because he's a guy with way too much power to just be hitting the ball on the ground and be like slapping singles on the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adam?
Yeah, no, it's really frustrating. Yeah, it's just frustrating to see. And, JP, we were talking about this before the stream began. And, the fact you see a guy like Jordan who's never really run a positive sweet spot range in his entire professional career, even as an amateur, we saw you don't have much data, but the ground ball rate is something we can look at. And even now, like this year at 42 or 43%, that's about as low as it's ever been. It's like you guys can double check me. Even then, like in the high 30s, low 40s, that's not the greatest. So a guy with his kind of power, you want to see him hitting a lot more line drives because those correlate, to sweet spot very, very strongly. You want to see him hit a lot more fly balls, and he's popping up a decent amount of pitches we've seen, right? Is that not correct? So, him being able to really optimize his barrel accuracy, given this amount of power that he has, is really something he's going to need, obviously, to become as better player as the best player he can be. We've seen him improve defensively this year in AAA and in the major leagues. It's night and day, and it's a miracle to see how well he's improved. But like he's really been able to just kind of not cheat, but live off of his like gargantuan power his entire life up to this point, because any pitcher up to this point is just when he's in the box, it's if you throw anything in the middle or anywhere in the strike zone, I'm going to crush it because he can hit a ball 110 miles an hour at will. So that's carried his entire profile for the first 22 years, or I guess he's probably been playing baseball since like 3-4 years old. So isn't basically his entire life, he's just been powering his way through. So now that he reaches the big leagues and the high minors, he's having trouble fine tuning his barrel accuracy. The minute he starts lifting the ball and hitting it with it in 32 degrees, it's over, right? I'm scared there's going to be almost like a Jordan Adele kind of risk where, he's going to bottom out altogether, but he can still potentially have the power to play maybe average as an overall player in right field and maybe not be the star that we were hoping. And overall, like I don't like the somewhat arrogance or the tone that he's kind of attacking it with, where he's saying like, I don't need to hit the ball in the air because he hasn't needed to, like we just mentioned. But I hope that he can realize that, hey, there's a problem here that we need to fix it. And if you don't, you're never going to be the all-star MVP caliber player that we're all hoping you can, and we know what you can be if you're doing everything right. So,
yeah,
Well,
I mean, I think it's important to remember too that he's still 22 years old. Like this is a guy who came up and absolutely just demolished MLB pitching as a 21-year-old. Like the potential was there for him to hit, and it hurts the team to not have him as one of those middle of the order hitters, as we've seen them lack that kind of middle of the order production. But it actually helps that Alec Burleson has actually started hitting the ball. Like there's a scenario in which Burleson is still getting his poor batted ball luck, and Jordan Walker falls off a cliff, and then all of a sudden we're looking at a corner outfield spot with no offensive production. So it helps that Burleson can actually play every day while Walker's getting himself right in AAA. And if Walker can actually get himself right in AAA, that's basically a middle of the order bat who's coming back up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I talked about it a couple of weeks ago on some random post that it really boils down to in many ways their three best hitters, the three guys they were counting on the most. You could throw Contreras into that. It wasn't trying to be a definitive statement, but their three best hitters haven't been what they needed them to be, and in one case isn't even there. So, and then yeah, throw Contreras in there too, because Contreras was great for a month and then he's been out too, and somehow they're still holding on to 500, which is encouraging but also disappointing at the same time, because one injury, one demotion, two guys that haven't been any good. That's four of your best 10 hitters, and that there's only so much that Nolan Gorman can do, honestly.
Yeah.
for real.
Yeah. Well, that was Mozeliak's interview. And the Q&A, as I said before, you can find that on the audio podcast. There's no video. They didn't let us record video, so I put it on the audio. I know a lot of you have already listened to that. So if you want to catch what Mo actually said, you can go check that out. But I think we covered it pretty well. And so, yeah, hopefully next year we'll all be there again, and we'll get to ask Mo more serious questions. Or if Mo's not there, we'll hit up Hein Bloom, I think, maybe, and see how that goes. So,
Sweet.
any final thoughts from you guys? Go Card.
Yeah, it was a good time. I'm happy to get to see you guys again, as always, and had a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will be back again here in a couple weeks with, I don't know what our next podcast will be. I'm sure we will come up with something exciting and interesting and fun. Yeah, so for Blake and Heather and Adam and Gabe, who couldn't be with us, I'm JP, Viva El Birds Podcast. It was great to see you, and we'll catch you this weekend. Have a great weekend.